Good afternoon. Marty Braden coming to you once again. This is part 17 of my introduction for my book, An Atheist Delusion. I closed off part 16's video by saying that we would come back and discuss what Dr. Lamb, who's a member of the BYU faculty, a book that he wrote about the fascinating parallels between the latest scientific discoveries of the past 191 years, and in particular those discovered in the last 25 years, and how Joseph Smith's revelations unites science and faith and paints a mesmerizing picture of the universe around us. So let's go ahead and jump right there and get back to it. In producing revelation upon revelation, Joseph exposed uncanny insights into topics well beyond his ken. Among these were revelations that touch on what we call science today, referring specifically to natural science. Many of the ideas found among Joseph's insights involved concepts that were either unknown to science in his day or poorly or even wrongfully understood. Dr. Lamb continues, looking back on Joseph's claims from the viewpoint of today's science, they were remarkably prescient, and it is clear that Joseph held a very forward-thinking 21st century vision of the world which came to be accepted and understood long after his death. Science and religion are often cast as antagonists on the world stage. Joseph did not share this view. He laid claim to any truth from any source, including science, and embraced it wholeheartedly. Indeed, his attitude on this matter may best be summed up in a quote by one of his most ardent followers and companions, Brigham Young, who said, and I quote, "The idea that the religion of Christ is one thing and science is another is a mistaken idea, for there is no true religion without true science, and consequently there is no true science without true religion." End of Brigham Young's quote and Joseph Smith's quote. Dr. Lamb continues on saying, this book is not designed to single out and respond to any particular criticism of Joseph's teachings in any apologetic way. Rather, it is to illustrate how Joseph possessed a very modern view of the world, one that a 21st century person would find fits quite comfortably with what science is now revealing about the world around us. End quote. In his book, Dr. Lamb took the approach out of necessity to simplify many aspects of the otherwise complex and fascinating topics that are at the heart of today's science. So, I respectfully ask that those experts in many fields of science hold off in taking exception to Dr. Lamb's generalizations for the present moment and simply read his book as a follow-up to my perspective on Richard Dawkins' arguments as found in The God Delusion. I very much like these three statements made by Dr. Lamb where he stated the following, and I quote, "First, the path of scientific advancement has not been a smooth one, and our current understanding of the world, itself undoubtedly imperfect, has risen from a series of fits and starts, successes and failures, with ideas coming in and out of vogue, sometimes lost and then rediscovered." Number two, next, too often we tend to dwell on areas where science and religion appear to be in conflict. I say appear to conflict because we must recognize that there can be only one truth, and where science and religion intersect and overlap in their claims, those who value both as reliable sources can rightly expect them to harmonize. And third, there are several examples where, in recent times, past areas of apparent conflict have been wondrously resolved, so that where once there was disharmony, a new harmony has arisen. And thereby we may entertain hope and faith that where apparent conflicts remain, with the gathering of new knowledge in both science and theology, those seeming discontinuities will be resolved like the ones that have already found resolution. End of Dr. Lamb's quotes. It's been nearly 200 years since the light of the gospel was restored, and it has only been in the last 200 years that science has taken on the connotation of what we can more strictly term natural science, embracing fields like chemistry, physics, biology, and so on. Joseph Smith taught, and I quote, "Knowledge does away with darkness, suspense, and doubt, for these cannot exist where knowledge is. In knowledge there is power. God has more power than all other beings because he has greater knowledge." End quote. I would even dare go on to say he has all knowledge, for he is all-knowing and all-powerful. There's a verse in the hymnal of my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's called "The Spirit of God." It says, quote, "The veil o'er the earth is beginning to burst. Dr. Lamb wrote, and I quote, "This is a truth the prophet Joseph Smith taught. Today we are blessed to live in that day that he foresaw when knowledge is expanding, and the veil of darkness which obscured our vision of the true nature of the world and our place in it for many centuries is certainly being lifted. As this process of research and study and revelation unfolds, new insights in both science and theology resolve old questions in some cases and raise new questions in others. It is my conviction, Dr. Lamb, that over time, knowledge derived from both areas of understanding will come to be in perfect harmony under one complex framework of truth. I love that. They come together in one whole truth." End quote. The diagram shown on the next page illustrates how wide the gap of knowledge was between the minds of the non-believers and the believers at the beginning of man's existence. Over the 6,000 plus years that followed since Adam and Eve's fall and being cast out of the garden, both things of a science nature as well as things of a spiritual nature have been moving ever so closer to intersecting, where each of these two magisteriums or authorities of truth will one day be circumscribed into one great whole of truth and perfection, thus proving that there never was any conflict between them. It was only in our lack of understanding. Okay, let's continue. With that thought in mind, I would like to remind you, my readers and viewers, what Dr. Lamb mentioned in his book, Joseph Smith's 21st Century View of the World, where the Lord promised that Joseph Smith, the prophet, would reveal all things to him at his second coming. This promise is found in the Doctrine and Covenants as follows. Doctrine and Covenants, section 101, verses 32 through 34. This is a great 3 verses. "Yea, verily I say unto you, in that day when the Lord shall come, he shall reveal all things, things which have passed, and hidden things which no man knew, things of the earth by which it was made, and the purpose and the end thereof." Wow, that verse. Things most precious, things that are above and things that are beneath, things that are in the earth and upon the earth and in heaven. As this diagram shows, which I'm not going to take the time to show, get the book and you'll see it. It is my belief that one day scientific knowledge and religious knowledge will intersect. And that day will be when science is revealed to be perfectly pure and religion is revealed to be perfectly pure. But that day will not take place until Jesus Christ himself returns at his second coming, at which time he will reveal the truth of all things and begin his millennial reign as he has promised. Dr. Lamb continued his comments on this subject, saying that as this revelation takes place, quote, "We shall see that on several key points, Joseph Smith was remarkably prescient in his understanding of the natural world, anticipating the scientific discoveries that we have now come to understand in the 21st century. Early in the 19th century, long after the revolutionary discoveries made by Galileo and his small telescope, most scientific observers in Joseph Smith's day viewed the Milky Way galaxy as the only galaxy in the universe with its large but finite number of stars. Such was the status of our human understanding of the universe among scholars in Joseph's day. At one point in Joseph's adult life, he found himself in a dungeon-like jail in the middle of winter, jailed for a crime he did not commit. While in Liberty Jail, Joseph received a revelation wherein God told Joseph that during this last dispensation of time, our time, much would be revealed about the universe. And after nearly 200 years, that promise has literally come to pass. End of quote. Consider these verses in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's the revelation Joseph received from the Lord while he was incarcerated in Liberty Jail. Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verses 36 through 38 and verse 47. "All kingdoms have a law given, and there are many kingdoms, for there is no space in which there is no kingdom, and there is no kingdom in which there is no space, neither a greater or a lesser kingdom. And unto every kingdom is given a law, and unto every law there is a certain bounds also and conditions." Parentheses, the laws of physics are just one example of what he's talking about here. And verse 47, "Behold, all these are kingdoms, and any man who hath seen any or the least of these hath seen God moving in his majesty and power." That's the verses So great. Here's a brief review of what humankind has begun to learn from God's promise to reveal all things. Here are a little and there a little, ever since the beginning of the restoration of his gospel back in the spring of 1820, and on through the 1840s, and continuing all the way up to today in the 2020s. Let's begin with a question and see how the answer confirms what God has promised. Question: how many stars do scientists say there are today? Today we now know there are literally billions and perhaps trillions of stars in our universe, just as the Lord promised over the 200 years since the Lord told Joseph that he would reveal much about the universe. A considerable amount of knowledge about our universe has been revealed and then accumulating at a breathtaking rate. Excuse me. The most recent and dramatic contribution to this knowledge, based as well as our understanding of the real scope of the universe, was the coming forth of the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, the ITER, back in 1988. It being designed to replicate the fusion processes of the sun in order to create energy on the earth. Its cost was around between $14 and $18 billion. Next was the launching of the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990 at a cost of $1.5 billion. And then there was the coming forth of the James Webb Telescope, which was successfully launched on Christmas Day back in December 25th of 2021 after 30 years in development and a cost of $10 billion. What's next? Using the Hubble telescope, scientists pointed it to a small, supposedly empty black patch of heaven, about the size of this on a little paper, but that's what he did, and wherein they found that there were galaxies everywhere in that supposedly small space. So the answer to our question here is that there are about 200 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and there are between 100 and 1,000 billion galaxies in the universe as far as our best guesses go. Recorded in the book of Moses is a revelation recorded by Moses, given to him by Jehovah, that says, Moses 7 verse 30, and were it possible that man could number the particles of the earth, yea, millions of earths like this, it would not be a beginning to the number of thy creations, and thy curtains are stretched out still. Wow. In the book of Abraham, chapter 3 verses 11 through 12, another revelation received by the prophet Joseph Smith says, thus I, Abraham, talked with the Lord face to face, as one man talketh with another. And he told me of the works which his hands had made. And he said unto me, my son, and his hand was stretched out like this. Behold, I will show you all things. And he put his hand upon my eyes, and I saw those things which his hands had made, which were many, and they multiplied before my eyes, and I could not see the end thereof. Wow. And again, in the book of Moses, in the Pearl of Great Price, it says, Moses 1, 28 through 29, and he beheld also the inhabitants thereof, and there was not a soul which he beheld not, and he discerned them by the Spirit of God, and their numbers were great, even numberless as the sands upon the seashore. And he beheld many lands, and each land was called earth, and there were inhabitants on the face thereof. Carl Sagan himself used the same metaphor of a sandy beach to describe the large numbers relating to the stars in our universe. Carl said, lo and behold, the number of stars in the known universe is greater than the number of grains of sand on all the beaches of planet Earth. End quote. Our understanding has come a great distance from the time of Joseph Smith and how the scientists of his day viewed the universe. Yet Joseph knew the scriptures and had received new revelations that gave him this knowledge and understanding, and he was ridiculed by the world at that day for saying it. Just before Joseph Smith's day, scientists like Kant and Herschel, they died in 1804 and 1822 in Europe, and Benjamin Franklin in America, who died in 1790, had been speculating about the existence of multiple worlds. But Joseph Smith, a contemporary to Kant and Herschel, went much further, and in his works of revelation, referring to the writings of Moses and Abraham, as I just cited earlier, as well as Joseph's revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph made claims about the number of stars and planets that were outlandish and unsubstantiated in his day, and that held him up for possible ridicule and eventual discrediting. Joseph even claimed that there were countless inhabited planets an outrageous proposition for the science of his day, but now it's considered to be a serious possibility by respected scientists. One must ask, why would Joseph risk criticism like this unnecessarily if he were inventing these things as a ruse? Why would he continue to do so even under the threat of death until he ultimately was killed? In the intervening years, Joseph Smith has been vindicated by scientific discoveries, and this stands as a scientific witness, dare I say even a strong reference leg of evidence to his prophetic calling. I'm going to go on now with a few more excerpts from Dr. Land's book, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to close this off and we'll pick it up from here at the next one. But this topic of 1844, 1830, all around in those years in that first half of the 19th century, Joseph saw into the future and was revealed just like prophets of old, and he had claims that no one was ready for, and yet science has proven it sufficiently true today. Man, comments, thoughts, write it down, but until next time, I wish you continued success. Goodbye.